House Leader Andrew Scheer. Mr. Scheer, a pleasure to see you as always. Thank you for making the time.
Yeah.
Did I read that right, that it's not a hard no on the possibility of Conservative support of the budget?
Yeah, well, what I heard was our leader, Pierre, saying that we're going to be fair-minded. We're going to wait and see what we see, what is actually in the budget. He's laid out some very reasonable positions. As he said, you know, I think it's fair to hold a politician to account to their own promises. And Mark Carney promised to keep the deficit at around that $42 billion mark. We think it's fair to insist that he keep that promise after making it during an election campaign. We believe it's fair to say that we should see some tax relief. We believe it's fair that we ask for an end to the inflationary increase in deficits. So we know what happens when Liberals spend massively, big eye-watering deficits. Inflation and interest rates hikes always follow. So that's why we're fighting for an affordable budget, because it truly does mean an affordable life for Canadians.
Do you think that you know, the promise of $42 billion was made a year ago? Is there a world in which Conservatives will concede that, given the events, the course of events in the last year, there might be required more substantial supports, for example, for sectors who are hardest hit by the tariffs that Donald Trump has put in place, and therefore $42 billion, sticking to the number that existed a year ago, isn't necessarily realistic?
Well, first of all, I would say that if that's what Mark Carney wanted to tell Canadians, he could have done that during the election campaign. He could have said, listen, ignore that deficit number. He did have it in his platform as well with all the costing. He could have said, look, I have no idea what the deficit's going to be. We'll see what happens. Then Canadians would have judged him on that, but he didn't. He put that costing into his platform. So again, I do think it's fair to hold people to account to promises they make during the election. He was campaigning for Prime Minister knowing that U.S. tariffs were going to have an impact on the Canadian economy. I'd also point out that there's a heck of a lot of spending that he's announced that isn't going to sector supports or supports for workers at work. You know, I saw one the other day that came across my feed: $8.2 million to fund gender-just, low-income rice supply chains in Vietnam. So, you know, I don't know what the Canadian people get out of that kind of spending, but it's certainly adding to the deficit, which means that they have to pay that back in higher taxes or inflation. So if Mark Carney met with our leader, the other parliamentary leaders, and said, look, you know, with the impacts of tariffs, we're going to have some loss of GDP and we're going to have some extra spending, that would be one thing. But he's not. He's increased spending on bureaucracy. He's still continuing to spend on consultants. And by the way, he's refusing to do the things that create that GDP growth, that economic growth that put people back to work and increase revenues for government. He's kept the Liberal production cap on oil and gas. He's kept the Liberal Canadian shipping ban that exempts foreign vessels from shipping energy on the West Coast. He's kept the taxes on food. He's kept the industrial carbon tax. He's kept the plastic regulation on food packaging. And he's keeping Mark Carney's keeping the Liberal fuel standards, which are going to increase the price of fuel for 17 cents a litre. So it's not just about the trade impacts that's causing the financial trouble for this Liberal government.
And on the first side, on the spending side, because I want to sort of parse apart some of what you're saying, like I understand, I don't know that program that you're talking about, but I understand why you would raise a concern about it. I look at the bigger ticket items that are adding substantially, it looks like, according to the PEO, for example, to the size of the deficit, and take, for example, you know, primarily a commitment to meet 2% requirement from NATO on defense. That's an extra $9 billion this year. Is that something that Conservatives wouldn't do? Like, that's a big chunk of change that impacts a $42 billion deficit, but I think there's an argument to be made for the validity of doing that, given that under Prime Minister Harper, we originally agreed to meet the target and then didn't for all these years.
Well, again, if Mark Carney was meeting with the opposition leaders and saying, look, here's what we're kind of bound to do with our international obligations, you know, here's a plan for Canada to carry its own weight in terms of NATO commitments and things like that, we would evaluate that fairly. But we're seeing a lot of wasteful spending on bureaucracies. We increased, but you know, billions of dollars in new housing bureaucracy. It's actually led to higher development charges in cities like Toronto. So,
but new housing is up. The construction is up 14% in September.
Imagine how much more it would be up if government just got out of the way and just.
Well, actually, government was out of the way, and it was practically stalled for 2 years.
No. When before Justin Trudeau caused the inflationary crisis, before he started funneling money out to bureaucracies instead of just getting out of the way and letting things. Housing was affordable. Housing was much more affordable 10 years ago. when Conservatives were in power. What's happened under this will be the 10th Liberal budget, and prices keep going up. Inflation numbers are back way up again. It's 2.4% overall, but almost 4% for food, a 2% increase on fuel prices, 4.8% on rent. This is all following from massive Liberal spending. And one other point on the defense spending as well. When we talk about spending on defense, you're right, the numbers are eye-watering, billions and billions of dollars on big ticket items. We're 10 years into this Liberal government, and they're still reviewing things like the F-35. They've stopped and started procurement things so many times.
To be fair, all governments have bungled that one, but in this case, they're reviewing it because of what's happening with the United States. I agree that they've gone past the deadline they set for themselves to conclude that review, but that review, the impetus for the review is what's going on with Trump.
I wouldn't lump previous governments in with the debacle that's gone on under this Liberal government. When Conservatives were in power, we got big things built. We had innovative way to get supply ships built for our Navy. We had heavy lift procurement.
Defense spending went down under the Harper government.
But we got things built. We got new equipment. We equipped our soldiers. After 10 years of Liberal governments, we have a lack of tools that our armed forces men and women need. So again, if Mark Carney came in good faith and said, look, we're going to streamline processes, we're going to find ways to cut costs on these things and get big things built, we would give him a fair hearing. But we're seeing just a lot of increase in just the operation of government, new agencies, new bureaucracies that's not actually having an effect on the Canadian people. But you know what it is? All that debt and deficits. It's putting an upward pressure on inflation. And now the Canadian, your tax dollar, Vashi, more of your tax dollar goes to pay the interest on the debt that Liberals have racked up than even on healthcare. So these things have a cost. That's what we're saying in these days. That's what we're urging the Prime Minister to realize, that these things all have a cost, and it's Canadians who pay for it.
Are you sure, though, that if he does what you want him to do, if the government does what Conservatives want them to do and spend less, that we will see a commensurate reduction in prices at the grocery store or elsewhere? And I ask because you're the same party that said when you cut the price on carbon, the consumer price on carbon, you're going to see lower prices at the grocery store. You yourself just said 4% up in the month of September, right? Like it didn't happen in the way that you said it did. Even gas prices. Why is inflation higher than expected this month? Because gas prices didn't decelerate as much as they were for the few months since the carbon tax was reduced, right? Like, yes, it cut the price of gas, but it didn't cut the price of everything else. So why should we really trust your economic analysis that if a deficit is lower, therefore all of our prices will be lower?
Well, I've been on your show many, many times where you and I have gone back and forth on the impact of the carbon tax. And I remember when after getting a lot of pushback saying that getting rid of the carbon tax wouldn't have an effect on inflation, on the little banner on CTV News, it said prices fall as carbon tax comes off. What we've seen since then is the government borrowing billions and billions of dollars. Inflation is always a monetary phenomenon. When your dollar purchases less, it's because the government, through the central banks or through their financial policies, are creating new dollars not backed up by economic growth. That is fact. Inflation comes from an increase in the money supply. We saw a massive expansion in the money supply.
It also comes from a contraction of supply, which is the case with beef and coffee, for example. We consume. We are a food-growing nation. We export most of the food that we grow. So to say that there's supply chain constraints across the board that's causing this level of inflation, it's just that's
not
what Statistics Canada said. That's not me. That's what they said in their release.
No, but when governments go out and borrow a bunch of money, it does two things. First of all, it does increase the money supply. That is what causes inflation. It also means that investors lend their money to the government. If the government's going out borrowing billions and billions of dollars and someone needs to go to renew their mortgage, there's only so much money to go around. And so when the government's gobbling up all that money through deficit financing, it puts pressure on inflation and interest rates. And you know how I know this, Vashi? Because that's what we lived under the previous 10 years of Liberal government. Mark Carney is copying and pasting the exact same thing. He's dressing it up with new language.
But then why is inflation 2.4% and not 6%, 7%, 8%?
Invite me back on your show in a few months and we'll talk about it then.
Well, it's not, but we'll see. Okay.
But this is how it started. This is how it started with the previous Liberal government. It starts to trend up. We raise the warning alarm. Lots of so-called experts here in Ottawa poo-poo us and say, oh, no, Mark Carney's recategorizing of spending in these new, bizarro categories, not going to have an impact. And then sure enough, that's what happens. It's a fact. It is there in the public accounts. The government is spending more on interest on debt than on health care. You know who wins when that happens? bankers and bondholders. Mark Carney's friends on Bay Street, they're the big winners when government has to pay more and more in interest. They're paying it out to people who hold that government debt. It's not sustainable. It's not making life more affordable for Canadians. We want the government to live within its means so that a consumer's paycheck goes further, prices come down, and they pay less tax.
I got to ask you one more question before we go, just about Mr. Poilievre's leadership, because he got a number of questions today. There's a report from Radio Canada that I believe they spoke to 5 different Conservatives, at least 4 actually people in caucus, who told them that they were very upset with Mr. Poilievre's comments around the RCMP, the comments we discussed last week that were posted on Northern Perspectives. Is there a possibility that Mr. Poilievre's leadership is in trouble because of those comments?
No. I mean, first of all, you saw him explain his comments today. I think a lot of Canadians understand that when Liberals engage in corruption where they line their own pockets with taxpayers' dollars, that should be investigated. Secondly, we had a great caucus meeting today. We emerged united and strong. I believe you're going to see an incredibly high levels of support for Pierre throughout the next weeks and months. He's won all the big issues. I mean, when we think just a few short years ago, Liberals were still defending the carbon tax. They're still defending their massive deficits. Mark Carney was promising a win with Donald Trump. He hasn't produced anything. There's 3,000 auto sector job losses at Stellantis, another 1,200 in Ingersoll. Pierre's got a vision, he's got a plan for the Canadian people that will put people back to work and make life more affordable. And I think you're going to see a lot of you're going to see that continued enthusiasm for what he's offering Canadians to restore that promise of Canada, make life more affordable.
Then why did a number of days later your party feel it necessary and his office feel it necessary to issue a statement of clarification and say, oh no, we didn't mean the whole RCMP or all the RCMP's leadership is despicable. We just meant Brenda Lucki. Is that not conceding that his comments went too far and were inappropriate?
I think there's lots of times where politicians address things and then
I don't remember it too frequently with Mr. Poilievre.
Well, I've been around this place for quite a while and I've seen it very often. You know, I remember when Liberals attacked the RCMP, calling the entire RCMP systemically racist. So for Liberals to somehow
and I remember asking the very hard questions at the time about that as well.
You know, act like any criticism is somehow earth-shattering or something like that. So what Pierre said today was very clear, that there was incredibly high levels of scandal with this Liberal government. Literally, board members that were allocating taxpayers' money diverted it to themselves. They paid themselves with tax dollars, and no one's been held accountable for that.
But why does that make the leadership of the RCMP despicable? Like the same thing I asked you last week, I still haven't gotten an answer from any Conservative. Like what is the proof to underscore that claim? You can believe the Liberals committed something criminal, did wrongdoing. We litigated that 1,000 times a number of years ago. There have been 3 elections since. Like, I understand the concern about what happened. I don't understand how you can conclude that the RCMP engaged in a cover-up to benefit the previous prime minister. Like, you have never offered proof of that. Well,
I believe last time I was on your show, I went through all the scandals that weren't investigated. You know,
but that's not
when you travel the country and you talk to people who are literally moving back home with their parents, seniors who are moving into their cars, and this isn't me, those are well documented in the media that have covered this, the hardship that Canadians are going through. When they see Liberal politicians sit around a board table, they're taking tax dollars. When the government takes tax money off someone's paychecks, you don't have a choice with that. It's backed up with the full authority of the law. You must pay your taxes. The government takes that money and pays themselves, or pays their Liberal insiders. That's awful. And there's a lot of Canadians that were frustrated that none of that was criminally investigated.
So that means that the RCMP engaged in a cover-up?
Well, what we believe...
That's a big leap.
Well, yeah, look, I mean, when you have audio evidence of the Liberal Prime Minister's clerk of the Privy Council intimidating, bullying a sitting Justice Minister to interfere in an independent court case, an independent criminal court case, when you have Liberal insiders funneling cash into their own pockets and none of that gets really investigated. The Prime Minister wasn't even investigated, wasn't even questioned.
It did by the Ethics Commissioner, who would have had to make a referral to the RCMP if she believed something criminal happened, and she didn't. Again, like, where is the proof in all of that? And I understand the claim of wrongdoing. Believe me, I remember litigating it myself.
Well, the absence
of
the criminal investigation.
That's proof of a cover-up.
Well, I think it justifies the statements that were made.
So you stand by them, even though you had to clarify them a number of days later?
Well, I refer you to Pierre's statement. I think it was very clear. I think it was clear what he said on the podcast. I think it was clear what he said today.
Okay, I'm going to leave it on that note.